Have you ever wondered why you buy lottery tickets even though you know you'll almost certainly lose? And why you also pay for insurance you hope you'll never use? Why one tiny chance of winning feels unbelievably exciting and one tiny chance of losing feels terrifying? Why sometimes you play it safe and other times you suddenly become a risk-seeking maniac? It turns out your brain has been following a secret set of rules, rules that don't match mathematics, rules that don't match economics, rules that don't even match common sense. And in 1979, two psychologists cracked open this hidden system and revealed that nearly everything we thought we knew about decision-making under risk was wrong. Today, we're diving into the legendary paper that flipped economics upside down, Prospect Theory, an analysis of decision under risk. A paper that didn't just expose human irrationality, it rewrote the foundations of behavioral science. A paper that would eventually earn Daniel Kahneman a Nobel Prize. A paper that explains everything from gambling addictions to panic selling to why people fall for scams and why insurance companies are rich. Before we jump in, hit like, subscribe, and smash the notification bell so you never miss videos like this one. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around. Because once you understand how prospect theory works, you will start seeing it everywhere. In politics, in finance, in your relationships, in advertising, in every decision you make without even noticing. This isn't just a theory, it's a mirror into the human mind. So let's start at the beginning. Imagine you're faced with a choice. Option A, a 50% chance to win $1,000 and a 50% chance to win nothing. Option B, $450 for sure. According to classic economic theory, the kind we all assumed humans followed, people should calculate expected value. The math says the gamble is worth $500, more than the sure thing, so you should pick the gamble. Except, most people don't. Most people grab the sure thing, even though the gamble's expected value is higher. And that, right there, is a crack in traditional expected utility theory. A crack that Kahneman and Tversky noticed again and again. Humans simply weren't behaving like economic models predicted, and the more they looked, the more the cracks spread. So they ran experiment after experiment, and patterns began to emerge. Patterns so consistent and so strange that they revealed a hidden psychological operating system built into every one of us. The first big discovery? Something they called the certainty effect. When humans face a guaranteed gain versus a probable gain, even a highly probable one, they overweight the certain outcome. They treat certainty like magic. In the paper, the authors describe problems where a small chance of winning is simply ignored until that chance becomes zero. Then suddenly, the whole decision flips. Imagine choosing between a guaranteed $2,400 or a 33% chance at $2,500. Most people choose the guaranteed $2,400, even though the gamble has a slightly higher expected value. But if you tweak the numbers so now both options are probabilistic, no certainty at all, people suddenly switch preferences. They start chasing the higher payout. It's not the number that changes them, it's the presence or absence of certainty. Humans treat certain as more valuable than almost certain, even when almost certain is statistically better. But Kahneman and Tversky didn't stop there. They dug deeper. What happens if you flip the scenario from gains to losses? That's where things get wild. Let's say instead of winning money, you're facing a loss. Option A, an 80% chance of losing $4,000. Option B, a sure loss of $3,000. Classic theory says, same structure, same math, same preferences. But the moment you flip to losses, people transform. Instead of becoming cautious, they become gamblers. They take risks to avoid the pain of a guaranteed loss. And this, they realized, was the mirror of the certainty effect. People are risk-averse with gains and risk-seeking with losses. Think about that. When things are going well, humans play it safe. But when things are going badly, humans throw the rulebook out the window and start swinging for the fences. This alone explains casino behavior, stock market crash behavior, political extremism during recessions, and why people double down on bad decisions. But the real bombshell was something they called the reflection effect. When you take a positive scenario and reflect it, turn gains into losses, the entire pattern of human choices reverses. The same person who avoids risk for gains will seek risk for losses. Kahneman and Tversky saw this again and again. People acted as if losing hurt far more than winning felt good. So they gambled to avoid losses, even when that gamble was statistically irrational. But the surprises didn't stop there. The authors noticed another bias creeping into decisions, something they named the isolation effect. Picture a complex decision tree. There's a stage where nothing really changes, a shared component that both choices share. Rationally, people should evaluate final outcomes only. But in reality, people tend to ignore the shared parts and only focus on the differences. Which means depending on how you frame the options, standard form, sequential form, combined, separated, you can flip people's preferences entirely. In the paper, Kahneman and Tversky show that simply rearranging probabilities in a multi-stage game can cause people to switch from preferring a probabilistic gain to preferring a sure gain, even though the underlying math hasn't changed at all. The structure stays identical, only the presentation changes, and yet humans behave completely differently. This is why marketers use framing, why casinos design games the way they do,
why governments structure taxes and benefits in certain formats. The framing changes the psychology, which changes the decisions. But the researchers weren't satisfied identifying paradoxes. They wanted a full alternative model of human decision-making, a new theory that actually described what people do, not what classic economics wish they did. And so, they built prospect theory. The central idea? Humans don't judge outcomes based on final wealth. They judge outcomes based on changes relative to a reference point, a psychological anchor, usually the status quo. But it can shift depending on framing, expectations, context, or even emotions. And this change is everything. Once you define gains and losses relative to a reference point, a new shape emerges, the value curve. Instead of a simple concave utility curve like economists imagined, this curve bends twice, once in the gain domain, once in the loss domain. In gains, it's concave, diminishing sensitivity. Winning 100 versus 200 feels bigger than winning 1,100 versus 1,200. But in losses, the curve is convex. The pain of losing 100 versus 200 feels larger than losing 1,100 versus 1,200. And most importantly, the loss side is steeper. Losses hurt more than gains feel good. Much more. Losing $100 might feel like -10 emotionally, but winning $100 might feel like +4. This single asymmetry explains decades of weird human behavior. It explains why investors hold losing stocks for too long, why people avoid admitting mistakes, why refund withdrawals feel awful, and why threats motivate more than rewards. But Kahneman and Tversky still had one major piece to solve: probabilities. Humans don't treat probabilities linearly. We overweight tiny probabilities, lotteries, jackpots, miracle shots. And we underweight medium to large probabilities, warnings, forecasts, and risks that aren't absolutely certain. To capture this, they introduced decision weights, not actual probabilities, psychological weights that distort reality. Low probabilities become inflated. A 1 in 1,000 chance? To the human brain, it feels way bigger. That's why people buy lottery tickets instead of saving. That's why people fear plane crashes more than car accidents. And in losses, this means people buy insurance for tiny risks, because the small chance of disaster looms large. But high probabilities shrink. A 90% chance doesn't feel as safe as the math suggests. Even a 99% chance still feels like, but what if? That missing 1% carries enormous emotional weight. This explains why people hesitate in near-certain scenarios, why they chase unnecessary guarantees, and why almost safe isn't reassuring enough. These distorted weights combine with the value function to dictate nearly every risky decision people make. You're not calculating expected utility, you're riding emotional waves built into the cognitive architecture of your brain. And once you understand this machinery,
Everyday behaviors become crystal clear. Why do people buy extended warranties for electronics, even though it's financially irrational? Overweighting of tiny probabilities stacked on top of steep loss aversion. Why do people refuse to sell a losing stock because then the loss becomes real? Because their reference point is the original purchase price, and moving below it triggers the pain of loss, amplified by the steep value curve. Why do people get more upset about losing $50 than excited about gaining 50? Because losses loom larger than gains. Why do people become risk-seeking after a setback? Because when below the reference point, the convex loss curve encourages taking gambles. Why can casinos make millions from games with a negative expected value? Because the thrill of the small chance to win is overweighted. Why do lottery jackpots become national news? Because the tiny probability is inflated so much it becomes irresistible. Prospect theory wasn't just a correction to economic models, it was a revelation, a reframing of what it means to be human. And it didn't stop at abstract experiments, it rippled through entire fields. Finance used it to explain investor behavior and market bubbles. Public policy used it to design better incentives. Health researchers used it to understand why people avoid screenings and why fear-based campaigns sometimes work and sometimes backfire. Behavioral economics as a field exploded because of it. And underneath all of those impacts lies a message we rarely confront. Our decisions aren't rational calculations. They're emotional reactions shaped by cognitive shortcuts, reference points, and distorted perceptions of risk. But once you see the pattern, you can change how you decide. You can recognize when you're avoiding a small loss at the cost of a bigger future gain. You can spot when a tiny chance is being blown out of proportion. You can avoid doubling down on a bad bet just to erase a loss. You can resist marketing frames designed to push your psychological buttons. You can set better reference points. And most importantly, you can learn to pause before reacting emotionally to potential losses or unlikely outcomes. Prospect theory gives you a roadmap to your own mind. And here's the twist. The very fact that we feel these biases so strongly is what makes us human. We evolved under uncertainty, trying to survive, not maximize mathematical utility. Our ancestors weren't calculating expected values, they were trying not to get eaten. So the next time you hesitate on a nearly guaranteed benefit, or get excited about a tiny improbable win, or refuse to admit a loss, or buy insurance you know is overpriced, remember, you're living out patterns discovered in 1979 by two researchers who simply asked, why do people really make the choices they make? And the answers they uncovered changed the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology behind your decisions, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us the biggest decision you now see differently. Thanks for watching, and welcome to the world through the lens of prospect theory.